Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this webinar from EOSC-hub, and we will start in a few minutes. We will give the time to other attendees to join us. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us in this EOSC-hub webinar that today will be focused on EOSC-hub data sharing policy recommendations and Elixir authentication authorization infrastructure. Thanks to the speakers who are joining us today, and we will start this webinar now. So I will give you a little bit introduction of the project, the EOSC-hub project, and give you some information on how to interact with ourselves today, and also where you can find the recordings of the webinar after the event. So next slide, please, Diego. Of course, this webinar is recorded and will be published on the website of EOSC-hub. You will find it under the webinar program page. And also, we will give these slides available together with the recording on demand so that you can access and watch it later for further uses. I would like to ask you to please keep your questions until the end of the presentations from our speakers, which will be conducted by raising your hand through Zoom functionality, but you can also either add them under the Q&A and the chat function of Zoom if you want to already, let's say, introduce the questions beforehand. Thanks. Next slide, please. I'm Francesca Spagnoli, and I'm from Trust IT Services, a small company based in Pisa. I'm working for the EOSC-hub Innovation Management, Communication, Stakeholder Management of the project. And I would like just to introduce briefly the project. Next slide, please. EOSC-hub project is a quite huge project, as you can see, with more than 33 million total euros budget, with more than 100 partners covering 53 countries and more than 150 people involved in making it successful. The coordinator is dictating EGI, and the project is almost going to its completion, even though it will be a bit finalizing until March 2021. We have more than 20 digital research infrastructures with EGI, UDAT, and Indigo Data Cloud, for example, that are jointly offering services, software, and data for advanced data-driven research and innovation. And the main objective of the project is to provide integration and management system of the European Open Science Cloud, of course, for acting as a European level entry point for all our stakeholders. Next slide, please. The activity areas, where are we working on? We're working on 4 main areas: services, which includes baseline services, applications, tools, and also data and training and consultancy services. Federation services such as the European Open Science Portal and Marketplace integration, authorization authentication services for identity, as we will discuss more today in detail, and accounting, monitoring, and help system, for example. Then we have two other kind of services, federated operations, including also customer relationship management and service level agreement and led with certification of providers, as well as processes and policies like security regulations, compliance to standards, term of use, and implementation of fair data principles, of course. Next slide, please. Today, we will focus on some of the key EOSC-hub key exploitable results, mainly working on better defining and presenting the services, some activities within the services in the EOSC service portfolio. Also important for interoperability, integration guidelines, and training courses and materials in the sense of policy recommendations that you can use for implementing EOSC services and internal services in the app portfolio. Next slide, please. Now I leave the floor to Ilona von Stein from DANS, the Netherlands, for the presentation on EOSC-hub data sharing policies. And later I will leave the floor to Pavel from the presentation on the Elixir authorization and authentication services. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesca. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Ilona von Stein and I work with DANS. It's located in the Netherlands. I'm their project manager and policy officer. I'm working mostly on matters related to data sharing policies. And also one field of expertise of mine is the certification of data repositories. I've prepared this presentation today together with my colleague Frans Huygen. He couldn't be here today, but he also, I thank him a lot for his contributions to this presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah, the background to this whole presentation is the task 2.4 in the EOSC-hub project. And this task is called, has a working group on data sharing policies. Here you see all the members of the working group. We have worked in 2020 with this diverse team on getting the final data policy recommendations ready. We worked in the first half of 2020, and in June, just before summer, we have submitted our final data policy recommendations. Next slide, please. With our final data policy recommendations, of course, we build on prior work. So first and foremost, we built on the first data policy recommendations that came also from the EOSC-hub consortium. These first data policy recommendations have three broad headings. So the three broad headings are implement fair, build technical expertise in safe data and safe settings, and also support the wider development of ethical and information governance framework. Also with this, we build on the EOSC pilot work that has been done prior to that. And another important source of information is also the Turning Fair into Reality report, which turned out to be a common and recognized document in shaping the European Open Science Cloud. Next slide, please. So here it is, actually our deliverable 2.9. Instead of writing a lengthy deliverable in text, we took another approach for this one and we translated the initial recommendations into a service provider's guide to data sharing policies. And the guide consists of 4 reference cards. Next slide, please. These 4 reference cards are targeted towards EOSC-hub data and service providers. So these are our initial target audience. These service providers are offered a palette of information without going too much into detail because that's the essence of a reference card. But they do get hands-on guidance and also pointers to tools. I think an additional benefit of these cards is that they have the possibility to raise the awareness of good practices that are already being being recognized in the EOSC-hub consortium. So it's also a good opportunity to highlight EOSC-hub good practices. Next slide, please. So here you see what we have done. On the right-hand side, you see the 3 recommendations that come from the initial recommendations from D2.8. On the upper right corner, there is the recommendation to support the wider development of ethical and information governance frameworks. We thought to translate this into the why question. So why should you care about implementing data sharing policies? 3 reasons. So we created a why card for that. The second implementation, implementing fair, we thought it could be translated into the what question. What are the essential concepts in the context of data sharing policies in the EOSC-hub system? The last initial recommendation that focuses on building technical expertise, we thought it would nicely translate into how. So how can you implement data sharing policies practically? And we give a couple of examples on how you can do that. I'll show you that a little bit later. We are actually well aware that a lot of things happened since 2018 when the initial data policy recommendations were launched. And we do recognize that, and we made an analysis of what we thought which recommendations are still valid, how can we group them, but the essence of it, of the first initial recommendations is still the same. So we didn't come up with new recommendations. So if you would like to know more about this justification of this approach, I kindly refer you to the deliverable text, and I will provide a link on one of the last slides. Next slide, please. So here is the why card. It's the first card of the set. And the answer, it contains the questions, why should you care about implementing data sharing policies? And on this card, we provide 3 reasons for that. We refer to data integrity, cross-domain collaboration, and trust and confidence. On the left-hand side, you see some of our methodology exposed. So as recommendation 16 from deliverable 2.8, Rob Baxter and colleagues wrote, EOSC-hub should consider the logging and tracking of scientific provenance data as an element of service integration design. So we thought, yes, this is important. We tried to find a good practice example of this. In this case, extending standard provenance modeling. And we have provided a note as well, a reference to that. And like I said, it's also important to highlight the EOSC-hub good practices. So we also highlighted here the B2 handle service that is adopting a PID-based provenance support. So this is the way the cards are built. The other 2 examples you can have a look at yourself. Next slide, please. This is the second reference card, and this relates to the what question. So what are essential concepts in the context of data sharing policies in the EOSC-hub ecosystem? What we did here, we tried to distill the essence of the recommendation 3, which reads, all shareable data objects in the EOSC-hub ecosystem should be fair digital objects. We try to visualize it. We try to, like I said, distill the essence. And again, we provided good practices examples. In this case, the EGI Data Hub, as well as the EUDAT B2 service suite. Another important reason, or actually another important essential concept, are licenses. And I refer you to the reference card if you would like to know more about recommendations into that area. Next slide, please. So then the next 2 cards are all how cards, and they deal with some examples how you can practically implement data sharing policies. Of course, persistent identifiers is an important one. We did mention the Freya project connections here, and also another tool that facilitates data sharing is the data tags recommendation system. on the left-hand side, you see already 3 recommendations around this topic already. Yeah, and we thought to highlight them here in the reference card as well. Next slide, please. Here you see a decision tree, which is part of the data tags recommendation system. And actually what the system is doing, it provides you with appropriate safeguards to comply with legislation about publishing privacy sensitive data to a data repository. It deals with risk classes, and with this, it helps you assessing and tagging sensitive data objects. The outcome of a data tags recommendation system are 4 distinct data object tags with a particular color that correspond to a sensitivity level. So for example, a blue tag refers to no, there is no personal data in your data object, so there are no safeguards to take. The other end of the spectrum, for example, is the red one. And this is the case where your data object has special categories of personal data. So that relates more to origin, belief, orientation, and things the like. So there we would recommend a lot of safeguards, and they are all written down in the initial deliverable. Next slide, please. This is the last how card. We have identified 2 other examples for implementing data sharing policies. And the first refers to the 5 SAFE principles. These principles are already fairly well known in the health and the medical and health science, but they might be a good inspiration point for other domains as well. And the second practical recommendation that has been that we have labeled under the header of adopting good domain practices relates to domain-specific research data management protocols. And this is very key to the EOSC-hub project as well, because in the work package 11 on training, there has been a lot of attention to this aspect as well. Next slide, please. So, like I said in the beginning, the cards were initially targeted towards EOSC-hub data and service providers. But actually, with all that's happening now, and also since the generic nature of the card, I think these recommendations could be valid for the EOSC at large as well. So I hope others could and will benefit as well. It will all obviously also depend on all the new activities that are taking place at this very moment. And there are a lot of EOSC governance mechanisms being set up first and foremost, the EOSC Association. So we will have to see how the future of our data sharing policies here will be picked up later. I can say, for example, we have made the connection with the Fair is Fair project, and this project is supplying practical solutions for the fair implementation. And they like the idea of these cards, and they are willing to reuse and adapt it. So our cards will live over the span of the EOSC-hub project, I hope. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. It provides a link to Zenodo records. So the reference cards are available there in PDF format. And also we have provided there the deliverable text, which gives a little bit more information about the scope and the nature and the design methodology. So if you would like to know all the details, I kindly refer you to Zenodo for this. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ilona, for the very nice presentation. Now I leave the floor to Pavel Brusek from Elixir GS.
Hello.
On the Authentication's authorization service.
Hello, everybody. My name is Pavel, and I participate in the Elixir Czech node. And today I will be presenting about the Elixir authorization and authentication infrastructure. I will go over what is Elixir, how it was established, how it works, and how it is connected to the EOSC-hub. Next slide, please. Elixir authentication and authorization infrastructure has been around since 2016. It is a whole infrastructure service which follows the ARC blueprint architecture, which I will show later. Uh, the infrastructure is managed by the Elixir Compute platform, and it is mainly operated by two Elixir nodes, the Czech node and the Finnish node. The infrastructure is used pretty widely. As of last month, there were over 6,000 logins per month. There are over 1,000 identity providers, which means home organizations which users can utilize to log in. There are over 100 relying services and about the same number of test services. And considering these numbers, there has been a significant growth, over 50% in the last couple of months, thanks to a self-registration process and a special web application where service owners may register and the Elixir admins may approve registrations so that connecting a new service is really easy. Uh, Elixir AI also provides authorization information based on group membership, and there are over 900 groups which users belong in, and they are granted access based on the membership. And there are over 5,300 users which use Elixir AI to access services. Next slide, please. This is the architecture in its whole. The core part, I would say, is the Elixir proxy identity provider on the left side, which connects many identity providers from Edugain and also social identities like Google accounts, Orchid, LinkedIn, and etc. So users may use any of these supported identity providers to log in, and they are assigned a unique and opaque Elixir ID, which is then sent to the relying services. There are many benefits to that. Uh, Users may switch identity providers, but keep their Elixir ID, which is useful for keeping data on the relying services under the same person. And the services don't have to deal with account management so much. Uh, the proxy also deals with step-up authentication, multi-factor authentication, and other authentication-related stuff. Uh, as I said, there are over 100 services behind this proxy identity provider, which is noted on the top. And the group membership and based on that permission membership is operated by a group and role management system called Perun. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, each user has only one Elixir ID, and he can switch identities, and the proxy consolidates these identities. On a technical level, the proxy operates with the standard SAML or OpenID Connect protocol, So services may choose one of them and they can support all identity providers. Next slide, please. This is the detail of the Elixir ID. Consider a user with multiple identities or accounts with various identity providers. Usually a scientist has an account with his home organization or university, maybe a Google account, which some of the users find easier to use on a daily basis. And for example, ORCID ID and Elixir Proxy identity provider unifies all of them into one Elixir ID, which is, for example, as you can see here, a string which does not contain the name of the user and is persistent for the same user even if he switches organizations. And the relying services obtain this ID and use it to, for example, store data for this specific user. Next slide, please. This is how it works on even more technical level. Uh, the user wants to access a service, a relying party. He chooses to log in with his Elixir AI. He On the proxy screen, he chooses his home organization, Google account, LinkedIn account, etc. He logs in with his identity provider of his choice, and the identity provider provides some of the attributes, for example, name and email. The proxy IDP collects these attributes and adds some more attributes, for example, a bona fide researcher status or some permissions based on groups from Perun. And this data is sent to the relying party and the user is logged in. For the user, it is pretty easy because he doesn't have to remember which identity provider he used. He always goes with Elixir login, and if he uses multiple identity providers, this relying party always gets the same Elixir ID. Next slide, please. Another feature of this system is support for GA4GH passwords. These are assertions about or permissions for specific data, and it is designed for distributed environments where, for example, one organization has some data which they want to provide to researchers. Another part of the organization deals with assigning permissions, so who is allowed to access which specific part of data. And then we have the identity providers and the relying parties. So using this mechanism, the organization, which is the basically the assertion repository, uh, states in the passport that a specific user is allowed to access a specific piece of data. It is cryptographically signed so that authenticity is secured. And then this passport is delivered through the AI infrastructure and through the underlying authentication protocols to the relying party. And it is allowed to fetch data on behalf of the user. This is used for dealing with access to really sensitive data where organizations want to limit access on a really uh, in a really exact manner. So for example, the European Genome Archive uses this to grant access to specific specific pieces of data, let's say, to specific users, so that the access is really heavily controlled. Yeah, if you have any more questions related to this topic, I'm happy to answer after the presentation. That was a brief introduction of the Elixir AI. Yeah, next slide, please. That was a really brief overview of the Elixir AI. If you are interested in more, I invite you to visit a website, which is elixir-europe.org. And there you can find more information about Elixir AI. As I was mentioning, there are many identity providers and relying parties, and EOSC-hub provides EGI check-in, which is used to access relying parties in the EOSC-hub. And users from Elixir AI may also use these services thanks to integration of the Elixir AI and the EGI check-in. As I was showing on the slides, the EGI check-in is connected behind the proxy identity provider, and users of Elixir AI may still use their home organization, Google account, or any other identity to access these services as well. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pavel, for the presentation. Let's see if you have any question from the attendees. If you would like, you can also raise your hand and you can ask the questions directly to our speakers. Let me see. Okay, seems that we have no questions, but of course, as I said in the beginning, the presentation will be available together with the recording on our website under the webinar program page. And if you want to contact directly the speakers, you can do it. I can send you the email here perhaps, or you can access it through the presentations. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us today, and I wish you a very great afternoon. Bye-bye.